Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Avatar in review video. This one's going to be episode 9 for the Legend of Korra as a series, the overall video for Legend of Korra. I've obviously covered each of the individual books, and like Avatar, I'm going to now cover the series overall, whatever its key points about the series overall that I like and dislike, and then we'll round off the series next week with the last video in the series, episode 10, Avatar: The Last Airbender versus Korra, the comparison video. So, first of all, I just want to mention that I actually recorded this video yesterday and I planned to release it yesterday. Unfortunately, after basically half an hour of recording, I checked my camera and my camera had basically paused completely and hadn't actually recorded it fully. So, that was ended up being both a positive and a negative. Negative, obviously, of course, and because I ended up wasting half an hour and couldn't release the video yesterday, and stuff like that. But positive because it helped me to figure out a problem that was going on with my camera, and from there I could actually fix it, so my camera should be working perfectly now. But yeah, let's get into Legend of Korra as a series. So overall, before I really get into any talking points, I just want to say that The Legend of Korra is in my top 2 TV shows of all time. Avatar and Korra are my first and second. I don't know the order just yet. Maybe I'll figure that out in the next video. But I just want to make it very clear that I really love The Legend of Korra. I think it's a fantastic show. And at the very least, what I want to say here is just that I think what Korra did that was a real positive was that it at least made it a question, a bit of a debate as to which series is considered better, Avatar or Korra. It definitely puts that debate into question because it's a very different approach to an Avatar show compared to ATLA, but it also feels very Avatar-like. So there's a lot of stuff to discuss, and that should be very exciting when I compare them in next week's video. But for now, the focus is of course on Korra, its strengths and its weaknesses. So I'll start off with what I consider to be one of the biggest weaknesses of The Legend of Korra, and that is the format of the show. That being the thing that Mike and Brian have always wanted to do with a Avatar show since they started, what they wanted to do with Avatar, and that was to have a show with a bunch of seasons that are in or around 12 to 14 episodes. This was their plan for Avatar. This is what they pitched to Nick in terms of the story they wanted to tell. But Nickelodeon told them, sorry, but right now all we're doing is 20 episode seasons, so we're happy to do this show, but it has to be 20 episodes per season. And Mike and Brian went back and rewrote the show around that, basically. Now, with Korra, it was the other way around. It wasn't Mike and Brian pitching a show to Nickelodeon, it was Nickelodeon asking Mike and Brian to do a show for them. So Mike and Brian were basically allowed to do what they wanted to do. So they decided to do the show they always wanted to do, and that was this show with 12 episodes in a season. And the number of episodes per season is a problem, and I'll get to that. But in addition to that, I think a problem is just the way that this series ended up being announced. In that, initially it was just a 12-episode mini-series done, that was it. Then we got season 2 announced, and we knew, okay, so it's going to be a 26-episode show overall, 2 seasons. Then very quickly, the next 2 seasons were announced, 3 and 4, and then we knew, okay, fully done, it's going to be 4 seasons. And, you know, it ends up not being a massive problem in that I don't think the show suffers massively for having had 2 kind of separate announcements of new seasons past what they originally had planned. But it creates a few little problems, I think. But the main thing I wanted to say here is just that Korra kind of highlights that for universes like this is a universe, not just a TV show, that you should definitely err on the side of having maybe too many episodes and maybe your story can't quite fit into that many, rather than having too few episodes. And I think Korra definitely suffered from that a bit because it does a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on in every single episode of Korra. And by the end of nearly every season, there's something that wasn't explored as much as it could have been. And in a show that is so world-building, so kind of story and kind of just building the universe focused, stuff not being explored or explained as well as it could have been eventually becomes a problem. And I have examples of this from basically nearly every season. In book one, stuff like the lack of explanation for what Amon's bloodbending technique actually did to Korra in the show was a problem, because ultimately it was that lack of explanation that created the issue that happened at the end of book one, where people were unhappy that Korra just got her bending back like that. I personally didn't really have much of a problem with it, because being a kind of canon, kind of crazy person who knows nearly everything about the Avatar universe, I sort of understood just by kind of putting this and this together what the bloodbending technique was, and why Katara couldn't heal it, and why Aang and the Avatar could actually give her bending back. I got that, but it could have been so much better if they'd actually explained that in universe. And there was a chance for them to do that, just with like have Katara say, okay, look, this is what's wrong with Korra, but I don't have the skills to undo this technique. I would either have to have energy bending or be able to do the same technique as Amon could do to do this, and I can do neither of those things. And so it made sense that Aang could then give her bending back as the Avatar, use energy bending and stuff like that. That makes sense, but they didn't explain it. Other things in book one, I'd probably just like, they probably could have explored the backstory of the villains a little bit more, but I'll bring that up more later on. Book three definitely suffered from having way too much going on. You had the Red Lotus introduced. You have to get introduced to 4 separate characters that are going to basically make up the Red Lotus for this season. Tell us what their plans are, how they relate to Korra's backstory. Also explore the fact that there's a new air nation, the air nomads are back in the world. That's what Korra's up to. While at the same time giving time to Lynn's backstory with Sue and all this other sort of stuff happening in the book. There was just a bit too much going on for the number of episodes that there were, and a lot of the airbender characters didn't get enough time. Opal is probably the biggest example of this. As soon as she left Zaofu and those episodes, she wasn't really involved in the book all that much, because once she became an airbender, we didn't actually see her really do anything as an airbender. She had like 1 or 2 little scenes, but fundamentally, like, if this show had had more seasons, we probably would have seen her arrive at the air temple and seen her go through her first few days of training, get introduced to some of these characters she hasn't met just yet, like Kai and stuff like that, Tenzin, and get more on her. But because of this too few lack of episodes, the few times we actually see Opal in her airbending gear, she's used as a hostage, basically, in the crazy situation that happens at the end. Jinora was a big part of book 2. She probably is the character who developed the most. Same with Kai. And they end up not having a lot of screen time in the book themselves, even though they're important, because they had to devote so much time to the Red Lotus. And then the Red Lotus is also an issue because there's so many different concepts that you have to explore with introducing this kind of splinter group of the Order of White Lotus. Introducing 4 unique characters that clearly all have their own reasons for joining up with this group, but we don't get explained any of their reasons for joining the group really all that much. Like, even Zahir, who's the most well-developed of the group, still you don't get a lot on him. I really think that if there was more episodes in the season, we would have got an episode or 2 of backstory explaining how this group came together, exploring the characters and personalities of these 4 characters. So the death of 3 of the 4 at the end of the book would have so much more impact. And just in general, that we'd have a better idea what the Red Lotus actually is. Like, they mention like Zaibao being this Order of White Lotus guy who created the Red Lotus. Please show us that rather than tell us. That's ultimately a problem with a lot of this stuff, that in Avatar they probably would have done backstory and flashbacks, but this show did flashbacks at certain moments but didn't do it at others. Book 4 also, I think, suffers from this problem as well, because stuff like the Bataar Jr. issue with his father just fell out of the series. Jinora and Kai weren't really involved in the series at all, and they were a couple together and we didn't get that explored. Opal and Bolin, we didn't get a final moment that I really think was needed towards the end after their reunion. And just all these little things like that, that if there was more time, more episodes in the series, it could have been so much better. Book 4, of course, not helped as well in that it's 13 episodes, but it's 13 episodes with an asterisk beside it, and then that asterisk says, well, basically 12 episodes and one recap episode, which doesn't really do that much. So it's basically book 4 is, 12 episodes. And that's another problem. Like, if Remembrances was a proper episode, I think a lot of the problems of book 4 would have been solved, but because they only have so few episodes, they didn't have enough time to explore everything. Even book 2, which I consider to be the book that suffers the least from this, and guess what, book 2 is the book that has the most number of episodes with 14. It's definitely the one that has the least amount of problems. For me, the only things I would have liked were make it clearer what exactly Jinora did at the end in the final battle, and you could have maybe shown us how Unalaq first met Vaatu. But beyond that, I don't really think it's the biggest problem. So, for me, that's the problem in general with Korra. And it's not just me saying that, because on the site Avatar The Last Airbender Online.com, we did the book 1, 2, 3, and 4 awards separately for each book as they finished. And there was always an award at the end, the only kind of constructive criticism award, which was most disappointing thing about this book. And for book 1, 3, and 4, the winner was something along the lines of too much stuff to be resolved in too few episodes. Not everything got the conclusion that it deserved. Book 2's was different in that the winner for a disappointing thing about book 2 was actually that people felt that the first half of the book wasn't as good as the second half of the book, and that the second half of the book had so much high quality episodes that it made the first half look not so great. Now, in the book 2 video, I talked about how I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the first half works for what it is, and the second half works for what it is, and it makes the book really solid overall. But that's what voted for. It's the only book that didn't get voted for, having a lack of episodes. It was just that people felt that the quality of the first half was not as great as the quality of the second half, which is very telling about what people see as the overall problem with this series. So that's the main issue. I'll probably refer to that a couple of times as we go through some of my other negatives, but that's a negative. Let's go into a big positive. Sorry about that, my throat is pretty sore, but the one of the main positives I think that Korra does so well is the plus side of having 4 seasons telling 4 separate stories. Korra's format is that you get 4 different villains over the course of this series, and these villains are all so unique and interesting as characters. Even the Red Lotus are an interesting concept. Yes, they weren't explored, handled the best in the series, but they're still interesting compared to the Avatar The Last Airbender cast of villains, which, Azula aside, is fairly standard. There's not like crazy interesting personalities going on there. So they're all very unique, and it's definitely something Korra has going for it very much. So, book 1, you actually have 2 villains, Amon and Tarlok, and I think a lot of people forget about Tarlok in the grand scheme of that series, but he is just as much of a villain to Korra as Amon, but he approaches things from the opposite point of view, in that he almost comes across as the opposite of Amon, in that he's so pro-bender that he's almost anti-non-bender, while Amon is all about getting rid of benders. And these are so interesting because they're interesting by themselves, but when you get the backstory, you see them both in a completely different light. These 2 kids who grew up in this happy family, led by this guy who was a kind of crime lord in Republic City, who settled down, kind of got away from the life of crime after losing his bending, and met this woman, had a family, but the second he found out that the 2 of them had water bending, everything changed. Bending changed the way this family dynamic worked, and ended up ruining the family overall. Because he from then on saw them as tools for revenge, and trained them with bloodbending, the psychic bloodbending technique, the kind of bloodline trait of their family, and from there you see that Noah Talk became as he did, became detached and stuff like that, while Tarlok didn't have as much pressure on him, and you saw why that happened. But just the idea that eventually the Noah Talk leaves, and that basically destroys the family. And from there, you get the idea that he's left. He hates bending because it changed the way the family worked, changed everything about him. And from there, he became a Mon. And then with Tarlok, even though he was the more happier of the two, he still suffered from what happened. And neither of them, when they left, wanted to be Yakon's tools for revenge, but ended up in later life doing exactly that. And that's such an interesting story. Tarlok talks about how they're, Korra bring this sad tale to an end, and it ends in a really sad way as well. And it's just such a tragic and really well written story for those two characters, with how they come to an end, and that you see potential for, like, okay, Amon's been stopped, he's Noah Talk, everything's revealed, and he says to Tarlok, like, okay, let's just leave, we'll start again. But Tarlok kind of knows deep down that they're just going to go somewhere else and it's going to start all over again. They're never going to be able to fully escape the influence of Yakon, and so he sees the only way out is to kill the both of them. And it's crazy that scene happened, and a really tragic end to that family, but it's such an interesting story, those two characters. And it worked as the kind of book one villain for Korra as well, that she had to deal with inequality and stuff like that, because she grew up her whole life being all about, you have to train at bending, you're the avatar, that's what it's all about. And so she grew up surrounded by bending and didn't really know what it was to have the differences between benders and people who don't have bending, and the difference in power level and stuff like that. So it taught her an important lesson in that sense. Book 2 with Unalaq, he fits perfectly with what the book is about, family and spirits, because he's a member of Korra's family, and he's also an extremely spiritual person who becomes her kind of spiritual teacher, and how he's kind of the complete opposite in many ways to Jinora, who is eventually Korra's spirit guide. But what I like about it so much is that, one, you have to deal with Korra, from the Water Tribe. They're all about family. That's their kind of the trait of Water Tribe people. She has to deal with the fact that her uncle is the villain in this situation. And because of everything that went on, she has to train under him at spirituality, because her father is not very spiritual at all. And she's kind of put in the middle between those two when they're feuding. And then you get all the backstory later on revealed in like book 3 and also in this book about Unalaq was a Red Lotus member. He ultimately organized the Red Lotus's attempt to kidnap Korra because Unalaq always wanted to train the Avatar in a different way than was already out there. That's obviously about what he and Vatu have talked about, wanting a new approach to the Avatar. And obviously he betrays the Red Lotus and stuff like that and goes out on his own, becomes the Dark Avatar. It's a crazy story, but it's so interesting how it links into so much of the history that ultimately Unalaq is responsible for having the compound built in the Southern Water Tribe, and Korra being so isolated, being the kind of how naive she is with regards to being around people and the world when she arrives in Republic City. It works so well, but also just in terms of the way, even though he's the villain and he's using her for his own goals early on in the book, he does actually have to teach her properly how to be spiritual, because she's just not spiritual. How can she unlock the spirit portals if she's not spiritual at all? So he has to actually teach her properly. And so she actually uses a lot of the teachings that he gives her in the early episodes later on in the book to defeat him. She uses that spirit bending technique to defeat Unavatu in the end. And it's really well done that happened. But also, she understands where his goal came from, and that the world was becoming not very spiritual, and so keeping the portals open was her way of changing that, and it was one of the biggest and best decisions Korra made in the entire series. So that was really cool. The Red Lotus, again, interesting villains by themselves in terms of they're cool just because of their powers, and there was potential if they were explored more in that the Red Lotus, I think, is a really cool concept. but I wanted to see those moments where Xiaobao left the Red Lotus, why this was specifically formed, more than just to hear going like, oh, we didn't like that they came out openly and served the Avatar. I wanted to really see and understand why this group formed. And then more personally about all the characters, Gazan, Peli, Minghua, I just wanted to know their characters, what they were, and that there's potential for all of them. Like with Minghua, being born with no arms yet being a waterbender, how did she first originally learn to waterbend arms kind of into place and stuff like that? Yeah, because she clearly has some form of a kind of psychic special connection to waterbending, being able to bend with no arms in the first place. So that's an interesting story even by itself. That way, it's not massively focused on her personality. It's more focused on her kind of physical traits, like the fact that how does she develop this cool bending. You could do a similar thing with Gazan. You know, he has an interesting thing just about where he potentially comes from with the tattoos that we see. But also he's a lava bender. How did he adapt to being a lava bender early on in life, and like who trained him and that sort of thing. Peli, again, you get a hint at what her backstory is actually about, with the being used for war as a weapon by a warlord and Zahir saving her and starting a relationship with him. That would have been interesting, but they told us instead of showing it to us. And then Zahir, this guy who wasn't a bender in the first place, yet was effectively the leader of this group. How did that happen? He was a martial artist. You know, what's his backstory? Like we don't really get all this sort of stuff. I would have loved to see that, but there was still so much potential. They were threatening physically in the book, and their ideals of freedom through chaos and wanting to take out the world leaders was very interesting, and definitely great setup in terms of just physically powerful villains to put Korra in a situation going into book 4. And then the final villain, obviously, Kuvira, was really fascinating in terms of just this character who, you know, started off basically just stepping up into a position that no one else would step up into. With Korra injured and Sue and the other world leaders not wanting to really take responsibility and stabilize the Earth Kingdom, Kuvira was the only one who stepped up into that place to save her kingdom and basically stop what happened to her in her past, being an orphan and stuff like that, happening to others, and just wanting a safe place for her people. But how those ideals got corrupted by power, and she started kind of purging the state of people not of Earth Kingdom origin, and just got too power hungry and stuff like that. She was a really fascinating villain just in terms of her quest for power, and how in the end what defeated her was just seeing that she was never herself going to be ever able to eclipse the power of the Avatar, in that she created this ultimate weapon, but Korra was able to stop that basically with her own hands, and that was enough to just completely stop Kuvira in her tracks. That was interesting. And again, like some of the other villains, I would have wished that they would have shown us more clearly where the bad side of Kuvira came from. I think that's what wasn't done particularly well with Kuvira in book 4. In that, yes, you get the little hints of backstory, obviously, that she lost her parents, Sue effectively raised her, and then she saw it as a betrayal when Sue didn't agree with her with regards to stabilizing the Earth Kingdom. Yes, but how did that then go from, you know, I'm going to start a relationship with your son and completely start this Earth Empire that's going to go against everyone, and then they're going to speak out at the Earth King's coronation to basically say, stay away from my state, I don't want anyone else's involvement, or I'll attack. That's what wasn't really explained the best, in my opinion. That where the villainous side of Kuvira came from wasn't explored the best. That if they had shown the strength of the emotions of Kuvira in those moments in her childhood when her parents abandoned her, and she first came to live with Sue and Zhaofu and stuff like that. Maybe her talking, how she kind of started dating Batar, and really what was behind that would have really helped. But still, just at a base level, what she did as a villain for Korra in book 4, as this character for her to find compassion with and stuff like that, relate to and learn from, it worked. So overall, each of the villains have their little thing that I would have liked to being explored a little bit more. Like with Amon and Tarlok to some extent, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of their backstory after the events that we see in Skeletons in the Closet. So see where exactly Noatok picks up this ability to use waterbending to block people's bending. See where he first gets the mask. See where he first meets Hiroshi. With Tarlok, see how he first decides that he wants to become a councilman and decides that he wants to become more powerful in the city. Those are the things I would have liked to have seen. With Unalaq, the only real thing there is that I would have liked to have seen how he first met Vatu and this kind of plan came together. Maybe a little bit about his Red Lotus history, but because of the Red Lotus only being introduced in Book 3, I understand why they didn't go down that road specifically. With Book 3, definitely it's the one that suffers the most for a number of episodes. I would have liked to have seen just characters for all of them. And then with Kavira, definitely show us some of her backstory was important. But overall, I think the villains are a huge success in Korra. They're all interesting characters in their own way, and they work perfectly for the book that they're in. So that's a positive. Another negative, I think the next one to bring up is definitely the romance. And I don't even have massive problems with it overall. I ultimately think that where the romance made mistakes was in Book 2. And they made such bad mistakes and decisions that it affected stuff going into Book 3 and 4. Book 1, I think the romance, yes, it's a bit too teen drama focused, but for the most part I don't think it's really problematic. It resolved basically almost completely by the end of Book 1 in that, like, yes, there was a breakup, Mako and Asami, but it went fairly well in that Asami was never really angry or upset about it. It hurt her to some extent, but it wasn't to the point where it really affected any friendships, and it started the relationship between Mako and Korra. The problem with Book 2 is, one, there's a 6-month time skip between Book 1 and 2, where Mako and Korra are happily together as a couple, and there's nothing hinted at in Book 2 that leads us to believe that they were arguing for all of those 6 months. Yet, the second we approach them in Book 2, they're arguing all over the place. And this is ultimately the problem. In Book 2, they made everything way too focused on the drama, rather than the relationship being like a connection between two characters. And that was the problem. Now, admittedly, there's other problems in Book 2 as well, in that I felt that Book 2 was leading towards, okay, the breakup happens, that's fine, they still have a lot of development to go through. Mako and Korra develop over the course of Book 2 and then get back together, or something like that. But they made huge mistakes with just the baffling decision to have Asami, kiss Mako and apparently start that relationship again. That made no sense to me, and it's probably the single worst decision and thing ever to happen in Korra in terms of just, this makes absolutely no sense, there's no reason you're doing this, and it just doesn't help anything in the series. It just, it creates problems for Mako, it creates problems for Asami in both cases. In Asami, it basically completely took away the fact that she was involved in this business plot with Varric, and she wasn't really touched on again with that. And then with Mako, it just created more drama with it coming across that he is just going from girl to girl, back and forth, when in fact, I don't think he's completely at fault for all of the romance. Like, what eventually happens after this book is that he is blamed for every problem with the romance in the show ever. I don't like remembrances in Book 4. 1, because of the fact of the budget that it had to happen. 2, because I actually don't like what they did with many of the stories in that episode for what was given to us. Like, I really dislike the way they tried to portray Mako in Remembrances, in terms of blaming him for basically everything that happened with the romances, when in fact, in Book 1, nearly all of the problems were caused by Korra for the most part, and yeah, Mako could have been more open towards the end of the book, but he eventually did reveal his true feelings and everything was sorted out fairly fine. And then in book 2, it's just the writer's decisions to go down that road that didn't really make any sense, that was just baffling. And then the real problem, I think, is that after they realized that they made a mistake with the romance in book 2, they changed it for the better into 3 and 4. But they had to do it by... They still had to address in universe the issues with the romance. And they decided to do that by basically sacrificing Mako's character arc in book 3 and 4 to basically just say, okay, he's responsible for it all. Korra to Sami, they're just going to continue on like nothing happened. Mako's going to suffer throughout book 3, feel like he's not part of the group because of what happened. He'll eventually become more comfortable again, and that'll be that. He won't be involved that much anymore. And I think that was a silly decision, just with how they just ruined Mako's character with the way they wrote the romance. And it's one of those things where, like, I feel so much sympathy for Mako as a character purely because of the way he was written in the show. I wish they would have done more with him. Thankfully, they did give him a really strong moment in book 3 and 4. In the fight with Minghua, they had him win that one and be really strong as a bender. And then again in book 4, they had him basically destroy the Colossus's power source by himself. So that was strong, but the romance, just big problem. And as well as that, they basically did the same thing with Bolin and Eska in that book, in that they broke up once. Obviously, Bolin left Eska at the altar and that kind of hilarious wedding thing. But then during the final battles, the two honestly had a proper connection to each other, and you thought, okay, wow, this is actually going to work out now that the two are more open with each other. And then for some reason, at the end of the book, they just decide, no, we like each other, but no, it's not going to happen here. And so they just end book 4 with no relationships in place. And the confusing thing about it at the end of that book is just that, is Sami together with Mako? You don't really know. Which again is just showing you how baffling that decision was. Book 3, they fix some stuff, and that the Jinora Kai relationship is actually really good and really nice. The Opal and Bolin relationship is actually really cool. In book 4, Varric and Zhu Li I thought was a really well done relationship, because it all happens in book 4, and it goes from basically start of relationship to wedding. It added character development individually for Zhu Li and Varric, plus their relationship. It was very well done. Unfortunately, we didn't get any Jinora Kai after all the setup from book 4, which was an issue. I felt Bolin and Opal needed one more scene in book 4. And then Korra Sami, I'm fine with it, as I said before. It's just I don't really have a lot to say about it, because there realistically aren't that many scenes showing Korra Sami as a couple. There's a couple of scenes at the end, there's the blush, but really that's it. It's just the start of a relationship, and I just find it difficult to say a lot about it beyond just like, I hope we get to see more of what this relationship is actually like. I don't think it was particularly like set up the clearest or anything like that, and it was honestly a little bit of a surprise that it happened, but I'm perfectly fine with that relationship. I just can't say that it was an excellent relationship developed and done in the show, because just not a lot was done with it. The few little bits that we got, very well done, and it's definitely a big important thing going forward, the fact that Mike and Brian did that, and I hope the comics cover it. And I don't really have a lot to say other than that. I definitely think they perhaps could have and probably should have thrown in a few more hints that were more romantic. I get that people are saying that, the friendship is the key kind of basis for this romantic relationship starting, and that's fine. That happens in book 3 and book 4 as well. But I wanted more scenes that were inherently romantic, where the context of a scene between the two was just romance. I don't think there's enough of those to really kind of say that this is an amazing ship just yet. But I'm fine with it going forward. So yeah, I think they made mistakes with the romances, and then they tried to make up for them by doing other things, and those made mistakes for other characters, mainly Mako suffering the most for that. So when I don't really think he was responsible that much. Like, as I said, Korra really made most of the romantic mistakes in book 1. Asami, I think, made the biggest romantic mistake in book 2. Not that Mako's completely innocent, obviously he did make some mistakes, but suffered way too much, I think, in terms of what was going on for it. Okay, I feel like I've already gone on a very long time here after only covering one or two topics, so I'm going to quickly go through some of my other points. I think one of the positives is just that I like that they didn't feel the need to overuse the Avatar The Last Airbender characters, and definitely pushed the new cast of characters and made them likable. I think that was very well done, because I liked, for one, that they didn't just leave out the Avatar The Last Airbender characters and say they're not involved. They used them, but used them in very specific and important moments. While with the new characters, they pushed them, and they've made it very clear in like the first episode that Katara saying to Korra, it's all about the new generation now, and then later on, Toph saying like, no, we're me and Katara, we're too old to get involved in these fights. We'll leave it up to you guys. I really like that. So, and just like Korra, the new crew, Korra, Bolin, Mako, Asami, Tenzin, all extremely likable characters. All of them have their own arcs, some less than others. I think Mako and Asami are definitely probably the weakest of the main cast in terms of the arcs that they have, but they're still likable because they do get some development. Like Mako's becomes a cop, he's really intelligent, he's a really powerful firebender, and one of the kind of main leaders of the group in that sense, because he's very intelligent. With Asami, she obviously is the sole kind of non-bender on the team, and that was a really important thing to have in book one. And then she has all of this kind of support roles within the group, like she's able to fly, she has access to the kind of money of the group, and all these kind of supplies, like the cars, automobiles, and all these airships and stuff like that. So she's important, and she can fight really well as well. So that's good. And then you have Bolin, and he's kind of the Sokka character this time around, and he's funny, hilarious. But he also had a really cool arc over the entire series, becoming so much more confident and capable on his own, proving to everyone what he can do and the potential that he has. And that Bolin from book 1 to Bolin in book 4 is a hugely different character. He has lava bending, he had a pretty high position in Kavira's army. He's pretty good leader by himself. He's actively able to protect his brother now when it was always the other way around. Some really big moments Bolin goes through. Really impressed with him. After Korra, he's probably the main character who has the most development. You have Tenzin, and what I liked about him is that he is obviously the son of one of our legacy characters in Aang, and I like that he was set up immediately as the mentor character, but he ultimately ends up having to learn just as much as Korra does over the course of the book, even though he's her mentor. And he has to learn stuff in the first book about the best way to approach teaching Korra, who is very much a person of the modern Avatar world, is to use modern techniques, like use pro bending to help her learn the ideas of pro bending and stuff like that. And then in book 2, he has to learn to accept that he is not his father, he's a different person. Accept stuff like that. He's not necessarily going to be Korra's spiritual guide just because he's always wanted to be. That ends up having to be Jinora, and how as a parent, and just accepting that she has an important role, he has to accept that about her. And he also learns a lot about his kids in that book, and as well as that his own siblings. And then in book 3, he also puts himself on the line to protect the new Air Nation and Air Nomads, and does everything to help train them, and the various kind of corrects the issues he had with training people, and that he has to bring the kids in and involve them, involve his brother Boomy and stuff like that. And just, again, sacrifices himself as well. He's not up to much in book 4, but I like his character overall. I thought it was a really cool arc for the mentor character. And in Korra herself, what is there to add to what I've already said in these videos? Such a powerful character arc. Book 2 and 4 are my favourites for her in terms of her character arc, and I've talked at length about those before in the past. What I do want to add, though, is that I like her book 1 development, in that just because of the way she was raised and stuff like that, she doesn't have a lot of world experience. She hasn't really traveled the world. All she knows is Water Tribe. All she knows is bending. And so that first episode is so effective because she arrives in Republic City and immediately encounters all of this stuff that she's not used to. Encounters people who don't like bending. Encounters poverty and stuff like that. People who aren't living the good life and all of this other sort of stuff. Encounters more rules than she's ever encountered in her life. And I think more importantly than that, encounters kids, teenagers of her own age, which she has very little experience in. So in many ways, book one is kind of Korra getting what she probably should have got much earlier on in life, just these world experience that she needed. So I really like book Korra and book one. So yeah, I'm just going to touch on a few quick points now to kind of end the video. One thing I really like about Korra is that it added so much world building to the universe, so much, probably more than Avatar did, primarily in terms of spiritual stuff. I feel that nearly everything we know about the spirit world is because of Korra. We know a few little things from Avatar, but there's a lot of confusion that still remains from a lot of the spirit world stuff in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Episodes like Beginnings Part 1, Beginnings Part 2, A New Spiritual Age tell us so many key and important traits about the spirit world. And just stuff like the spear portals, the north and south spear portal, and now the Republic City spear portal, all essential things. And while, yes, there's still a kind of unresolved plot in Korra about where they left off the human-spirit relationship, and that they abandoned the city once the battle started and then came back as soon as it was over and didn't help at all. That's an issue that I think is going to be resolved if we ever get Korra comics. But I still think the strength of all of those episodes, learning about light and dark spirits, the impact that your emotions can have on the spirit world, learning about the origin of the Avatar, was such important world building that those two episodes, Beginnings Part 1 and 2, that those two episodes are just so important. Learning about the first Avatar Spirit, essential episodes, in my opinion. So there's that. Again, I think I've pretty much covered a lot of the main points that I have here. I think, the strengths of the show are definitely the villains, the characters. The main weakness, though, is that we didn't have enough episodes to really get to know all of these characters. A lot of the more minor characters ended up not being explored in maybe the best way. The way they used the legacy characters and the fact that there is history before this time was very well done. But at the same time, they did mess up the romance a little bit throughout. So there's that. I think the animation in Korra is overall, on average, an improvement over Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think Studio Mir is definitely the best animation we've had in Korra so far. And I don't think the Studio Pierrot thing, as I said before, is a big issue because, in my opinion, Studio Pierrot have better animation than Dior Movie from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Which I think, that's one thing I think a lot of people forget, that Avatar had multiple animation studios as well. So there's that. Is there anything else I just have to mention before the end of this video? I'm really trying hard to think about this. What have I not talked about with Korra as a series? I think just the fact that it did manage to, at least to some extent, live up to Avatar: The Last Airbender is definitely a success, because our fandom can be pretty negative at times, in terms of, the kind of G1 mentality that there are always going to be fans out there who struggle to accept anything new and will only and always reference the past. And I think for the most for the most part, Korra succeeded in that. Yes, there were fans who obviously left after book one. They just weren't interested in Korra. But I think for the most part it captured the minds of the fans, and people are now Korra and Avatar fans, and they accept it as a really positive introduction and addition to the series. So they're the main points I wanted to make. I probably forgot a lot, and this video definitely, in terms of format, was different to the one I recorded yesterday. But I'll obviously talk more about Korra in the next video, Avatar versus Korra, but definitely in the comments let me know what your thoughts are on my main issues and positives that I had here, and just in general what your opinions are on The Legend of Korra. But other than that, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.